Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Historians interview here on the channel. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. And today's guest is a first timer here on the channel. My guest today is Professor of History and Coordinator of the Global Studies Program at Delaware County Community College in Medina, Pennsylvania. He holds degrees in History and Global Studies from LaSalle University, Villanova University, and the University of Pennsylvania. His publication topics include the U.S. Army's 1916 Punitive Expedition into Mexico, tactical development in the U.S. Army during the Great War, and Cold War diplomacy. He currently resides in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and to tell us all about his journey as a professor, as a historian, and author, and more. Let's give a huge round of applause to first timer here on the channel, Professor Jeffrey LaMonica. Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So before we dive into your journey as a professor and historian and author, is there anything else you would like to add about your background?
Well, let's see. I was born in Philadelphia. I went to public high school. Um, I went to LaSalle University in Philadelphia. I was a history major there as an undergrad. From there, then I went to Villanova University for graduate school, where I did modern European history and a secondary focus in Latin American history. And more recently, well, not so recently anymore. It felt recently, but it's 10 years ago now. When I was in my 30s, I went back and I got a postgraduate degree in global studies from UPenn. And
Nice.
I taught at LaSalle University. I was full time there in their history department for 10 years. And now I've been here at the community college for 15 years.
Nice. Very, very nice. So let's actually talk about that. So for you, Jeffrey, what was sort of like your aha moment in the sense that not only did you love learning about history, but you want to teach history to the next generation of future historians?
Well, I have to, I guess I have to give credit to my parents for my initial introductions to history. When I was a kid growing up in the Philadelphia area, my parents took me to a lot of museums, just as kind of family activity. We went to battlefields. I remember as a kid, doing like a family weekend at Gettysburg, um, Fort McHenry down in there in Baltimore. I remember that as a child. Uh, Boston, and doing the whole, Revolution tour in Boston with Bunker Hill and all that business. And of course the Gettysburg battlefield, which I already said, but that's the closest one. So we went there several
Right.
times. So yeah, my parents really, I guess just because they enjoyed it as a family activity, and I was, immediately kind of taken into it. My father he's a Vietnam vet,
Mm,
and I remember as a kid, he always seemed to be, especially on the weekends, watching different war movies that were on TV. Like the classics, like The
right.
Longest Day, and A Bridge Too Far, uh, and so that also piqued my interest. The fact that I understood as a child that he had been in the army. He didn't say too much about his experiences, but I knew that he had been in the army, and that kind of piqued my interest in military history. And then, of course, seeing things like The Longest Day as a kid, and just kind of got me even more interested. And one moment I remember in particular is when one weekend, my father was watching the old Sergeant York movie.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the classic. And and I remember seeing that movie with him and being having a lot of questions about, well, what war is this? You know, because as a kid, I was very familiar with the Second World War. I didn't really know that there was a war before that war. And so I
Right.
remember the Gary Cooper Sergeant York movie being on and me being kind of taken with it, and then having a lot of questions for my dad about, like, well, gee, what war is that? And he kind of went on to explain, well, you know, there was a war before World War II. And then that just captivated me. I was so curious about this war that had taken place before World War II. You know, World War II is the war that everybody knew about, but that there was
Mm-hmm.
this other one. And yeah, I mean, I've been studying, researching, writing about World War One ever since. So that was really, I got to give Sergeant York credit for that one. I also was
Nice.
very lucky to have really, really great history teachers in middle school and high school. I really lucked out. I had some really great, enthusiastic, interesting middle school and high school history teachers. Like I said, I went to public school.
Right.
And so then right out of high school, I knew that I wanted to teach history and I knew I wanted to study history. And I also knew pretty early on that I wanted to teach on the college level so that I would have to go on and get a graduate degree in order to do what I wanted to do.
Awesome. So once you got your degrees, both of them, what was sort of the goal you had going forward? As you said that you wanted to teach at the college level. What was sort of like the goal you had in mind once you realized, okay, I'm here, I'm where I want to be. What's my goal? And overall, your promise, you made yourself that you would teach your students, and how would you teach your students? Sort of that need you want to satisfy for them.
Well, I guess very early on in my college teaching, like, you know, within my first couple of experiences teaching on the college level, you know, immediately came to realize that, wow, you know, the majority of the students that I would be teaching were not history majors.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I guess just being kind of naive going into the profession as a college level professor, I guess I just kind of assumed going into it that I would just be teaching rooms filled with history majors.
Right.
And that, of course, was not the case. And so I learned very early on that, you know, I had to somehow deliver the material in such a way that it would be useful and valuable to both history majors who were just there for the sake of studying history, but also students from all these other majors that, you know, if I'm lucky, I'll pique their interest in history. But at the very least, I would be able to pass on skills in the
Mm.
course that would then be useful in whatever other fields they were going into. So this happened very early on, and I kind of realized that for this purpose, I would be find myself approaching my history courses, especially the survey courses in global history or in just general U.S. history, in a thematic way, you know,
Mm-hmm.
rather than kind of trying to tackle, you know, these big long chronological periods of time, especially in a global course where, you know, you're really supposed to try to globalize it. You know, there's just trying to tackle it in this chronological way seemed very daunting
Right.
and potentially uninteresting to the students if we just
Mm.
stayed kind of restricted to the timeline. So I started very early on kind of approaching my history courses in a thematic way where we would take a theme, you know, like modern revolutions. And then maybe we would look at like three revolutions at different points in history, at different points around the world. then next we would go on to another broader theme, imperialism, and then we would look at different
Right.
examples of imperialism. And I really found that kind of thematic approach to really be effective in trying to kind of deliver the course in a way that had value for like everyone in the room. The other thing I also placed a big emphasis on very early on was focusing uh, more on cause and effect than
Right.
the actual events themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than getting into the weeds of the chronology of the French Revolution and all the different phases and what happened when and who are all the most important people, instead doing more with well, what were the causes of the French Revolution? What were the ideas, but also the material circumstances that led to it, and then what were the ramifications of it, and not completely ignoring the
Right.
details of the event itself, but spending much more time on the cause and effect. And the reason why I started to really settle into this approach is because I realized that that's where I can really work with the student's ability to think and write, critically and analytically. When we're thinking, when we're dealing with cause and effect, it really allows, a lot of questions that really foster that critical and analytical thinking and writing skills that, in my opinion, would be useful for these undergraduate students that I was teaching, whether they were history majors or not.
Right, definitely, because a lot of historians, say the same thing as you were saying, is that for new people going into, history classes like university, college, sometimes the interest is gone because in schools we're always taught names, dates, and place, and that's drilled into us at a very young age. And when we get to college, 9 times out of 10, or I should say 50-50, some people will find their love for history again, and sometimes some will not find their love for history again, which is very, very unfortunate. So, what was the feedback and response like from friends, family, colleagues, as well as students after your first few years of teaching? And did those responses validate your goals that you just mentioned just now?
For the most part, yes. I was pleased very early on to see, particularly in student response, student evaluation results, and just kind of interacting with students um, outside the classroom in kind of a more casual way, and just kind of getting their thoughts and ideas and feedback, and uh, you know, having the opportunity to advise students, especially history
Hmm.
majors at both LaSalle and here at the community college, after they were done with my courses, and now we're moving on and taking other courses. But I still kind of remained in their academic life because I was their advisor because of the fact that they were history majors, and just kind of listening to them in terms of like what experiences were valuable, which ones weren't so much, listening to some of their critiques of some of the courses that they've taken. And I was, but of course, the student evaluations for my particular classes were particularly useful to me because I would be able to see, typically in the comment sections,
Mm.
where students were showing appreciation for the fact that in my courses, when we spend a lot of time with cause and effect of
Right.
historical themes and events, and we raise these questions that then provoke critical analytical thinking about cause and effect, that students tended to appreciate that because it gave them, on a relatively regular basis in my classes, it gave them the opportunity to chime in with their own opinions and their
Right.
own thoughts and ideas. And the critical and analytical process kind of requires them, especially in my writing assignments, they're kind of required to kind of address questions and answer them however there's no right or wrong answers with a lot of these questions in my
Right.
writing assignments. It's just, well, what do you think of this? Well, what do you think of that? And, does this seem to be entirely economically motivated, or are there other things at play, or, whatever? And these types of things give these students an opportunity to give their own opinions. And I was always very pleased, and still continue to be pleased, to see that students really appreciate that. Like, they really appreciate the idea that, that their thoughts, opinions, interpretations matter in my course.
Mm.
And it's funny how at no point was that ever really a goal of mine, to like make students feel like their opinions matter. What my goal has always been is to get them thinking critically and analytically. But in doing that, they're expressing their opinions, their thoughts, their interpretations. And I was pleasantly surprised, and continue to be pleasantly surprised, to see how much they appreciate that. That
Right.
in my classes, in my classroom discussions, but also in the kind of writing assignments that I assign, students have the opportunity to respond to certain historical questions, and respond in their own way. That I'm not expecting a certain answer. There, I say many times throughout the course of a semester, there is no right or wrong answer. I just want to, it's up to your own interpretation. How do you feel about this? And if you're able to support that thesis, that interpretation, in an intelligent way, then that's what I like to see. And like I said, I'm always pleasantly surprised to see how much students appreciate the ability to do that. Having the ability to express themselves, and just that sense of that their opinions matter.
Right.
Yes, maybe that's not something they're used to in all of the courses that they take.
Definitely. And then your answer is very similar to another professor who I had on the show a few days ago. She actually had a class where she actually had teacher students. It was around the lesson time was on the antebellum South. And she divided the class into two groups. One class had to say, why they are against slavery, and the other side had to support slavery. But she made it an interesting little discussion. Do not look at history through the modern lens when you give this answer. I want you to write as if you're a person during the 1800s and give me your answer. It was a very, very challenging assignment for them because, as she said, they already had in their mind what they were going to write with the modern sense, but thinking as a person during that time, either for or against, was a real challenge for them, as she said. But the response was very interesting, like how much research they really had to think of. Okay, what would a person say if they were for slavery? What would their arguments be based on? What research would they use? It was a very interesting one, and I love that in history it gives you that freedom to really explore these topics of interpretation, which is ultimately the goal of history, is to continue the discussion of numerous topics thereof. And now, kind of more of a reflective question, which I would like to hear your thoughts on, Jeffrey, which is, as like a professor, and historian, and author, it is in some aspects a lonely feeling, in the sense that you're crafting all of this material, you're creating all of these plans, you're teaching the next generation, and then you're always wondering, am I really making a difference in my students' academic growth? And then that voice of imposter syndrome is in the back of your mind saying, you're not doing this right, or no one's really listening, no one's paying attention, they're just taking this class just to pass a grade, or whatever the reason may be. So for you, Have you ever had those moments of like imposter syndrome, uh, growing in your field or even before? And if not, what has continued to discipline you to not just write about history in the case of your books, but also teach history and share what you've learned to the next generation?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I feel that for me, it's been a balancing act,
Mm,
and it's something that I think going into the field, especially going into the field, at the time that I did, because I went into the field. Let's say, well, I mean, I was being educated in the field and being trained in the field in the mid late '90s, and then of course started my career in 1999. And I kind of feel like that was a time period where academia was going through a bit of a transition. Um, for example, I feel like in the generation or so prior to me entering the field, just having an advanced degree was enough.
mm,
That having an advanced degree in your field was all you needed to get respect, to get prestige, to get attention, and to be really looked upon as somebody who was an expert in your field. Just simply having that advanced degree. It makes me think about Professor Kingsfield in the movie The Paper Chase. Where
mm.
just having the degree is what made him this prestigious professor, right? Of course, during the time that I started entering into the field, it started to change. That just having the degree wasn't enough anymore. Competition was getting much stiffer. There were many, many more PhDs out there. There were many, many more people with having an advanced degree, having a graduate degree, having a PhD. Those kinds of things, they didn't set you apart anymore. You were one
Mm.
of many. And it was around, and that's kind of the time I feel like that change was taking place as I was kind of entering into my profession. And that is around, fortunately for myself and some of the people that were involved in my training when I was going through graduate school, kind of made me appreciate that, you got to do more. You have to kind of show what you can do. Just having the degree, that might help you get a foot in the door, perhaps, but you have to do other things to show what you can do. And that's where I kind of realized that, yeah, the extracurriculars mattered. That, you know, research really didn't have to end, and probably, for me, couldn't end once I got the degree. That it had to continue. That I had to continue to pursue my interests. That I had to continue to do research. That I had to continue to find topics that I was interested in, but also would be viable to continue to lecture outside of the classroom, to publish, and this kind of thing. But that wasn't easy, because at the two institutions that I have spent my career at, LaSalle University and now here at the community college, the emphasis, the expectation from the faculty is to teach. We have primarily a heavy teaching load. There's
Right.
less emphasis on research, publication, and those, quote, extracurricular things. But I have found in my career that at in both institutions, but here at the community college in particular, that it does allow, I mean, despite the very heavy teaching load, that it does allow an environment to pursue other things if you so choose. And that's kind of where I have been able over these, 25 years to, focus on the classroom, but also, have access to time and resources and support, especially here at the community college, to also pursue, my research interests and things outside the classroom, publication, this kind of thing. So I've been very fortunate, particularly here at the community college, to have be in a place that doesn't put the emphasis on research and publishing. The emphasis is on serving students in the classroom, but will offer you the support and the space and the time that you need to pursue research and publication and things like that if you want to. And I feel that that's something that I've taken advantage of, particularly in my 15 years here at the community college. But it's been a balancing act. I had family, and children, and that's difficult to balance your teaching, your family life, and if you also choose to pursue research and writing, yeah, that can be quite a balancing act. And I don't disparage people who do not do all that, because it's not easy. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel fortunate that I have been able to do that in my career.
Excellent. And speaking of publications, you've written several books, one of which that really caught my attention was the 1916 U.S. Punitive Expedition into Mexico. So, can you tell us more about that and why you decided to work on this topic so much, and just what drew you to it?
You know, it's a funny thing for me, and I don't know how unique it is, but it is my experience. All of my life, even before entering into this field, um, yeah, I've been very interested in collecting things, and particularly going to antique stores, going to rare bookstores. Going way back to when I was, um, in my 20s. And the funny thing about that, and again, I don't know how unique this is to my experience. Perhaps other people have also found themselves, and other academics may have also found themselves in this position. But many of my publication topics, including the 1916, punitive expedition into Mexico that I recently wrote about, came from actual artifacts that I have been fortunate enough to find in my antiquing. Yeah, I guess it's like I said. I mean, I don't know how rare that is in the field, but even my early research topics, like when I was in graduate school, came from actual physical artifacts that I came across and thought to myself, wow, this piqued my interest. And then, of course, dug a little deeper and realized that there's actually something here, and then pursued it. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, for the whole 1916 topic, years ago, I had found um, a newspaper from 1916, and I preserved it. And of course, the headline was, and I still have it. I take it on the road with me when I do talks and stuff. And it was about an incident that had occurred in Texas, where Mexican bandits had crossed the border and wreaked havoc and caused some vandalism and this sort of thing. And I thought, wow, that's an interesting topic. And at this point, I was a younger person, and I certainly wasn't writing at that time. But I said, gee, this is something I'd like to explore more one day. And I just kind of put it aside. And of course, more recently, I actually was during the pandemic where I had more time at home than probably I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to, that I kind of decided, all right, well, you know what, now it's time for me to pursue this more deeply. And so that newspaper became the inspiration for me to then research the topic more deeply and eventually write a book on it. And I can say that has been the story of most of my publications. I did a book years ago on the year 1953 and why that year is kind of a pivotal year during the Cold War. And that book also came from some old documents. I came across actually a retired professor at LaSalle University gave me this big, thick ream of mimeographs that were the transcripts of the communiques from London to the British ambassador to the United States. And he gave them to me, when he was cleaning out his office or whatever. And I held on to them for a long time. And I thought, one day I'm actually going to start paging through them and see. And sure enough, they all were from the year 1953. So here I'm kind of following along, flipping through it. And yeah, eventually I realized, wait, 1953 was quite a busy year for the Cold War, and then that then prompted me to research it more deeply, and I was fortunate enough to be able to produce a book out of it. So yeah, I have had a lot of luck thus far in my life finding artifacts and documents and things at antique stores and stuff like this that wind up being food for very viable topics to write on. I don't know. Eventually, I maybe I'll run out. Eventually, I have to make sure I continue going to antique stores to keep finding things to write on.
So when you have written, so writing all of these books, all on different topics, what is sort of like the audience you are writing for these kind of books? Because for me, like the United States Punitive Expedition into Mexico in 1916 is a period in U.S. history that really doesn't get a lot of discussion. Many people don't know that the U.S. Went into Mexico around the time of the Great War before we even went to Europe. So that's a period that has always been fascinating for me. So going back to the question, who are sort of like the audience you were writing for at the time? Do you have a good idea of your audience? And as a third part to that, how important is it for a book such as this? It's good to know who your audience is ahead of time.
Yeah, and that's always a challenge, because I think we many of us, I know myself, I mean, I would like ideally to be able to publish books and articles that would appeal to both popular audiences who are just kind of interested in looking at an interesting topic in history, and also more specialized audiences who are maybe looking for an interpretation that is new. So you ideally you approach these topics in such a way that you can maybe appeal to a more popular audience, but at the same time that there's something there, there's a new or different slant or interpretation that would also appeal to a more academic crowd, or other colleagues in the field. And so
Right.
I've tried to do this. I think that probably most of my publications still kind of lean more on the academic side because they are typically on very specialized topics. For example, I mean, if you're looking for just a broad introduction to the Cold War, my book may not be for you, right? Because I do specialize, that particular book anyhow, specialize on one particular year and how that year, in my opinion, is kind of pivotal in the Cold War. But nevertheless, if somebody has a broad knowledge of the Cold War but wants to know more, even kind of a casual reader might still pick up, you know, a book that's just specifically on 1953. So, and then, for example, a couple of books that I've written on military history, including the one that deals with the expedition into Mexico in 1916. With those books, you know, when it's all said and done, I find that they do kind of live somewhere between academic and popular, because in those books, in both of my military history focused books, the one that deals with 1916 and also the one that deals with the United States Army in World War One, yeah, I mean, there are some chapters where I do, you know, kind of get deep in the weeds of tactical doctrine and training methods, and you know, what was learned and what wasn't learned and this sort of stuff. But then there are also chapters that are, you know, pretty vivid narrative descriptions of the campaigns and the combat and the conduct of the conflict, which probably would have appeal to more popular audiences. So I think right now, yeah, I've kind of existed somewhere in the middle, and I kind of, you know, would prefer to stay there. You know,
All right.
I'm kind of past the point in my career where I'm looking to write, you know, an academic tome that's going to change the way people think about military history. You know, I'm kind of over that. You know, I'm at a different point in my career. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to write some ambitious popular history that tells, you know, talks about the Great War from the beginning to the end either. I would much rather fish out a more specific topic that has been a little less explored, just for my own interest as well as whoever might be reading. So I continue to, you know, search for those types of topics. Recently now, I'm toying around with the possibility of looking at the Russo-Japanese War in the early 20th century. But again, not just in a broad sense, but in a more specific way. And again, it's another one of these antique store finds, but I was able to find a volume of books from 1906, 1907 that were written by United States Army observers of the Russo-Japanese War. And I thought to myself, well, there's something interesting. Not necessarily a book about just the Russo-Japanese War, because my assumption is there's probably plenty of those that already exist.
Right.
But a book that more focuses on what was the U.S. and particularly the United States Army's reaction to witnessing the conflict and what might have been learned from it. So that's kind of my most recent idea. We'll see where it goes. But the interesting thing about that is the way I arrived at that topic is very similar to how I've been arriving at topics all through my academic career. It usually involves finding some primary source, some kind of artifact that I can get my hands on. And very often, you know, it might get put aside for a while until I find some time. And then I say, let me return to that and see if there's something there. And then, of course, you know, I've been fortunate enough to get a few publications in that way.
Interesting. And going back to what you said, how you didn't want to write something totally ambitious, but something like that's like in the middle ground. I definitely think that for historians getting out of college with almost like that mentality, like they have something that's going to be like the start of their legacy as a historian, because I think all of us want to get like, those top tier ones, like, like being a professor, working at the government level, working as a curator, an archivist, whatever. And we think that our paper or a thesis that we've been working on throughout our academic journey is going to be the start of our legacy. But that's not necessarily true. It does not guarantee it's going to be the start of one's legacy. And that's where I've come to learn, maybe you may have thoughts on this too, Jeffrey, which is the two paths. Do you want to be an historian, or do you want to be known as an historian, which are two very, very different goals, with two very different mindsets. So in your opinion, how important is it for first-time historians exiting their academic journey and now going into the workforce to really understand that the paper they've been working on, the thesis they've been working on, whatever passion project they've been working on throughout their entire academic journey does not guarantee the start of their legacy as an historian, but it should not deter them from pursuing history and giving back to the field that has given them so much?
Yeah, well, anybody going into the field nowadays, um, and like you said, people go into the field for different reasons. Some people want to get into public history, they want to get involved in museums or archives, and that's of course one thing. Um, Other people do genuinely want to teach,
Mm-hmm.
which has been a big part of my career. And then, of course, yeah, like you said, I mean, other people would rather find themselves in a situation where they're, paid more to do research and publish. And I would say that no matter which one of those are your paths, if I was talking to a young person that was getting ready to go into the field nowadays, uh, my first piece of advice would be, you have to have tenacity. You have to be tenacious, and you have to be persistent, and you have to kind of constantly be moving toward your goal, even if it's just at a crawl, to keep moving
Mm-hmm.
toward it. Because there's a lot of negativity nowadays in the field, and it typically, I mean, there's some external negativity. We live in a society nowadays that's very here now, and what's the next big thing. And so that in and of itself kind of places less value on the past. So that's kind of the external, for lack of a better word, negativity. But there's also a lot of internal negativity. There are a lot of people in the field who are negative about the field. They're
Mm.
kind of down on the field. You know, whether it's because they look at the field and they see how there are less job opportunities and career opportunities than there might have been at a previous time in their career, that
Right.
causes them to be negative toward people who are thinking about entering the field. Some of the discouragement also comes from, there's there's still some gatekeepers in the field, quite a few, that kind of feel like the only way that the field of can be more value is if less people are in it. Kind of
Mm.
getting back to Professor Kingsfield and the paper chase, right? Going back to a time in the late 60s and early 70s where college professors were few and far between. And therefore, whoever was a college professor, whoever had dedicated that much time to becoming an expert in a particular field, that immediately garnered you respect and prestige. And I assume there are still some people in the field today that feel like, well, the only way we're going to get back to that is if less people get into the field. And that might cause them to project negativity in this kind of gatekeeper way to kind of discourage people from getting into the field. But whatever the case may be, people getting into the field are going to face negativity and discouragement. Whether that negativity is in discouragement is coming from people who are like, hey, don't get involved in this field because there's not a whole lot of job opportunities, or people who, may have some kind of gatekeeper complex. And for my advice to people getting in the field is you just need to be tenacious and power through that. You have to not let that discourage you and say, hey, yeah, I've got dozens and dozens of people that are discouraging me from getting involved in this field, but it's my passion, it's what I enjoy, and I'm going to keep moving toward that goal. Like I said, even if moving toward that goal grinds down to a crawl, you're still moving toward it. The other thing I guess I would say is that, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is the idea that you really need to think outside the box. That getting the degree and having the degree is not enough. That you need to demonstrate what you're good at outside of just having the degree. And you do this by through exposure. Really, I mean, you have to show others around you, whether they're in positions above you or your own peers, your work ethic, demonstrate your work ethic and every opportunity you get, demonstrate your work ethic. I would say also always take the opportunity to forge relationships. And when I say that, I mean everybody. I think when we go into a field, very often we feel that we just need to forge relationships with people that are above us so we can elevate ourselves. But you'd be surprised that, fostering relationships with your peers, even fostering relationships with people who might seem like they're totally outside the field, you'd be surprised how that can lead to opportunities. And it also provides you an opportunity, again, to show off your work ethic, and take advantage of these opportunities, whether it's through forging relationships, take advantage of these opportunities to demonstrate what it is that you're good at, aside from just having the degree. Because, unfortunately, we're living at a time where, just having a degree isn't really enough, that you really need to demonstrate your skills, your special skills outside of just having a degree. What are you good at? And take advantage of those opportunities, even when they seem minor, even when they seem like, oh, well, gee, if I go and, just talk at the local library in front of 15 people, what the heck difference is that going to make in forwarding my career? Well, that's the grind, that's those tenacious baby steps forward, that if you really have your heart set on forging a career in this field, you have to keep on pushing and try to be tenacious and not let yourself get discouraged.
Definitely. And on the topic of connections and networking, who would you say have been the people who have, been by your side since the beginning that you would like to give a shout out to? I know you said you had a lot of great professors growing up who really helped passion for history, but now where you're at in your life, are there any other people you would like to mention and give a shout out to who have helped you grow even more?
Well, there's a few different sources of inspiration in this more advanced part in my career. In the early days, I mean, it was my parents fostering my interest, and high school history teachers inspiring me, and even professors, both undergraduate and graduate, kind of pushing me to do better and be stronger and, write better and think more deeply, and all the stuff that I was encouraged to do by, my professors in both undergrad and on the graduate level. But at this stage, yeah, sure. I mean, well, one of the things which is a slam dunk is my students, right? I mean, without students, there are no professors. Is always
That
the
is
thing
true.
that I remind myself. Whenever I hear professors around me talk disparagingly about today's college student, I always think to myself, yeah, but without these students, there are no professors. We wouldn't be here. And so I've always, especially more recently now at this stage in my career, really come to appreciate the inter-existence between me and my students. That without them, there is no me. And, and that's regardless of their skill level or ability. And of course, that's something that I've come to really appreciate at the institutions that I've spent my career. I mean, LaSalle University, yes, it's a university, but it caters mostly to, Philadelphia area, uh, you know, more or less middle class, a lot of first generation students.
Mhm.
So it's a very, very grounded student body. And of course, here at the community college, same thing, a lot of urban students, a lot of diversity, a lot of non-traditional students. And so, you know, like I said, regardless of the skill level of the student or, what kind of background they're bringing to the table in terms of, did they go to a high school where they learned a lot of history? Did they go to a high school where they learned none? I always remind myself that, no matter what, without them, there's no me.
Mhm.
And so my students continue, and maybe now more than ever, because I am getting later in my career, are really a huge inspiration. Um, and I guess the other is here, the college itself. I mean, this is a great environment. I'm very fortunate to be at this particular college. Like I said, they support me um, in my research, in my publications, in things that I want to do outside of the classroom. The college here, I mean, for a community college, it has been um, incredibly supportive and nurturing in this, my scholarship.
Mhm.
And that's fantastic. It's something that many people would not expect working at a community college. But if you are so driven, this place does support you. If you choose to just focus on totally teaching and not, pursuing scholarship, yeah, sure, that's what many people around here do, and that's exactly what they're supposed to be doing. But if you do choose this college, here in Delaware County, it really has been a great place to nurture that. Another great thing that I did a little bit later in my career, now it's 10 years ago now, but when I was in my 30s, I decided to go back to school. And I went to the University of Pennsylvania to get a postgraduate degree in global studies. And that was a great decision. I think it really rejuvenated me because, I had been out of school, after finishing, way back in 1999. So I'd been out of school for a long time. I'd been, in the field teaching at LaSalle and then here, at that point for 15 plus years. And the college here decided to start up a global studies program, and I became the coordinator of that program. And I thought to myself, well, it's probably a good idea for me to go and get some kind of postgraduate degree or certification in global studies. And sure enough, Penn had a program, and I thought, all right, well, let me apply there and see if I can get in. And I did, and I went to Penn for uh, for a year, and took a whole variety of courses and did my capstone and all that. And it was a great experience because I was in my mid-30s at this point. I had not been in the classroom in a very long time, and going back to school and being in the classroom again and interacting with my classmates and interacting with professors again. And Penn was just a great environment, just to be in. And yeah, that was a great experience. And I really feel that was a very rejuvenating experience for me, and came at a good time. I got a publication out of it. All the papers that I wrote for the different courses that I took in the program, because it was a very interdisciplinary program. I took history course, I took, philosophy course, this, that, and the other. So I wrote a lot of different papers, and I was able to cobble them together. And I also drew upon some of my colleagues here at the college to contribute. And we put together an interdisciplinary reader that myself and several other professors here, still use in the classroom today. And so, yeah, I have to say that going back to school, which I understand. I mean, not everybody can do that, right? I mean, life
Hmm.
is life, and you have career and you have family. But I was able to, in my mid-30s, find the time to go back to school and get a postgraduate degree. And I have to say that it was a great experience. One of the more surprisingly rewarding experience that really has now helped me to sustain and continue to be interested and invested and intellectually stimulated. So that was a great experience. But that was 10 years ago now. It feels like yesterday. But yeah, I mean that was back when I was in my mid-30s. But that was a great experience. And of course, I would be nowhere without the support, of my family and my children and my wife. So that's great too. It's great to have a support system at home, and that's invaluable.
Awesome. And now we arrived at the final question of this amazing interview, Jeffrey. And I think you already answered it earlier, but with everything that you've learned and still learning, what is your word of wisdom to history students, history enthusiasts, people going into, education, wanting to become a professor, want to work in the archivist jobs, museum jobs? What is your word of wisdom to them?
Well, I guess, in addition to some of the things that I said previously about tenacity and forging relationships and taking advantage of any and all opportunities to kind of demonstrate what you're good at and demonstrate your work ethic. And, these are the kind of things that, you know, help you get recognized out of the pack. And of course, yeah, I mean, nowadays the pack is big. There are a lot, you're competing with a lot of people that are in the field and in the job market. So jump on those opportunities and forge those relationships and have that tenacity and take advantage of those opportunities to show what you do well and show off your work ethic. I guess another kind of general thing, and I don't think I'm alone in this, is kind of moving away from the idea that history repeats itself,
Mm,
because that sets a very unrealistic expectation for what society should be getting out of studying history.
right.
We set the bar that high. I think that's an unfair bar. This idea that, well, if we study the past and we study history, then we should be able to prevent future mistakes because history repeats itself. you know, when you really stop and think about it, that is an unrealistic expectation to place on studying the past. If you're expecting to be able to prevent problems in the future, if you're putting that expectation on your study of history, you're probably going to wind up being disappointed. The good news is, though, is that while history doesn't repeat itself, there are certain, of course, themes
Right.
that repeat themselves. The circumstances are always different, and that's what makes it difficult to use the lessons of the past to prevent the future, because the circumstances are always different, but the themes are there. And so for people that are looking for that value, you know, people who say, well, gee, you know, I want to study history, but eventually I want to go on to be a politician, or I want to go on, you know, to be a lawyer or whatever, that kind of approach, that more realistic approach, why do we study history? You know, to understand cause and effect, to understand these repetitive themes, to think critically and analytically, and be able to relate that to current events. Of course, history can also provide the context for current events, which unfortunately not enough people understand. You know, well, why is this happening over here? What is the historical context? I mean, in those ways, studying the past, you know, really can inform the present, because none of what exists in the world today in terms of current events exists in a vacuum, right? There's a historical background to why these things exist. So in that regard, yeah, sure, you know, studying the past does inform the present. And I guess the other thing that's very important is to, you know, appreciate the complexities of history, especially considering cause and effect, and why, as historians, we engage in many different and, you know, very often disagreeing interpretations of the causes and effects of historical events and themes, because it's complicated. You know, anybody who's out there trying to explain the cause of a particular event or theme in history with a singular explanation is someone to be suspicious of.
Right.
You know, I feel that you know, a more valid, a more realistic historian is one who's able to admit that the causes and the effects of all of historical events and themes are very complicated, and we can do our best to try to sort through and interpret, but understanding that there are multiple interpretations because of the complexity of cause and effect of all these historical events and themes that we looked at. Yeah, anybody who's trying to claim that, oh well, you know, this happened because of this one single thing, and you know, that oversimplification is always something to be a little bit suspicious of.
Perfectly said, Jeffrey. Absolutely well spoken, and a perfect way to end this very amazing historians interview here on the channel. Now, before we officially end, where can people find and engage with you on social media to learn more about you, to know where to purchase your books? And speaking of your books, where can people go and purchase a copy?
Okay, well, Google's always a good place to start. You know, if you just Google my name, it'll probably lead you to many of my publications. They're all they're all available through some of the, you know, the major sites like Amazon and so forth. Um, I'm also very active on LinkedIn. That's kind of my social media outlet of choice. So if you search for my name in LinkedIn, you can find me there, and you could also go on the website of Delaware County Community College, where I'm also present there as well. So yeah, social media, LinkedIn is where I spend most of my time these days.
All right, I will link those all down below in the description of this video. Thank you all very much for joining us for another Historians episode here on the channel. And as a little teaser, Be on the lookout for Jeffrey coming back again because he will be making his return later this year for his debut Historians Lounge episode, which, fondly enough, will be talking about the U.S. Punitive Expedition into Mexico in 1916. So, more details on that will be coming later in the year. So, be on a lookout for more details on that. Thank you all so very much for joining us for another interview. Make sure to like and subscribe and comment down below what was your favorite part of the interview. And as always, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out, wishing you all a wonderful day and afternoon.